Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the English Teachers Community Intensive Course Blended Course project in partnership with Kelsey, supported by U.S. Department. I am RLM, coordinator of the American Corner in Astana. Nice to meet you. And today's moderator of this course, Tatiana Adegamovna, president of Kelsey. Yeah, you are welcome. So before the beginning, I would like to tell you a little about the American Corner and Makerspace. So American Corner in Astana are small American-style libraries located within a local partners organization, usually in a library. There are American Corners in 10 cities of the country. American Corners also supported local English instruction with an extensive collection of English teachers material and that frequently used by local students and teachers. American Corners also offer US speakers on a different of topics and host a range of classes, clubs, and activities for free. There is our Instagram pages, and you can scan QR code for more information about us. Yeah. For now, I would like to remind you about some rules. We have turned off your microphone for a stable connection. If you have any question, you can ask them in chat box or at the end of the meeting during Q&A session. Stay during our session to get a certificate, and don't be shy, be active. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on a YouTube channel, American Corners Kazakhstan. So thank you and enjoy it. Now I give you a word to Tatiana. Where is Tatiana? Tatiana, could you turn on your microphone? I think we have some technical problem. And now today's speaker, Kelsey. Kelsey, do you hear us?
I do. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So there are a couple of technical difficulties on my end as well. I'm on my computer, but my video doesn't work. So I joined on my phone also. That's why you might see two of me in the chat. So maybe you can see me, maybe you can't. Hopefully you can. I'm very sorry about that. But I do want to ask also, is there an echo? Is there a problem with my audio?
No, it's not.
No. Okay, perfect. So then in which case, can I go ahead and get started?
You can start now.
Okay, perfect.
You can demonstrate that. Yeah.
All right, so in which case, I am going to start by sharing my screen. Let's see. Hopefully you can, oh, no. Let me give this a try. Present full screen, present. All right, can you all see my screen right now?
Yes, we
Yeah.
Okay, super. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Hi, my name is Kelsey Dabrowski. I am a Fulbright English teaching assistant, and I work at Projectt University. I am a native speaker of English from the Southern United States. And it's really nice to be able to talk to all of you today. I have been to the American Corner before in Pavlodar. So hi, Pavlodar. It's nice to see you all here. And as you can see, the topic for today that we're going to talk about is mastering pronunciation in the era of virtual education. Now, this is a huge problem, I think, for a lot of us teachers, especially those of us who have been working for the past couple of years. During COVID times, a lot of you might have been teaching online, and teaching is hard in general, but teaching online has its own collection of terrible, terrible problems. So let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk about how specifically we can help students improve their pronunciation even while doing virtual classes. This is a really difficult thing to do for a multitude of reasons. Let's talk about it. So the biggest problems, those of you who have been teaching online for a few years, I don't have to tell you any of those problems, you already know. Number one, a lot of you might have had a lot of students with a choppy internet connection. It's always terrible. They're saying, they're trying to talk to you, but all you can hear is, so it's never a really good way to interact with each other, and kind of impossible to be able to check pronunciation, especially. That may be from their end. That may also be from your end. So maybe they're not hearing you very clearly. Number two is just having a bad microphone. Some students are on their phones, some students are on computers. Not everybody has a really, really good microphone. So again, you're not really able to hear students well. You're not really able to hear exactly what they're saying. And then the third part, cameras turned off. I know that this is probably a huge problem for a lot of you. And of course, this is hard for every teacher, but we all know how bad it is for language teaching. Language teaching is not just reading out of a book. Language teaching is not just even speaking. You have a special connection when you're seeing each other in person, face to face. And especially when it comes to pronunciation, when it comes to phonemes and phonetics, you need to be able to see that person's mouth. You need to be able to see how they're moving their lips, where their teeth are. You need to see what they are doing with their voice. And when you're doing this online, it is really, really hard to do. So, especially when thinking about phonetics, being able to see, for example, imagine you're teaching your students about the TH sound, the. I've done this with my students because even at the higher levels, it's always a difficulty doing the TH sound. And I have to go to each student and show them like the inside of my mouth, how my mouth is shaped. I have to go up to them and I need to essentially instruct them how to move their lips, to put their tongue between their teeth, like, and this is impossible to do online. Not impossible, but very, very hard. You're probably not going to be as effective. So what can we do for students in order to help them actually overcome these difficulties with pronunciation when you're dealing with all of the problems with internet? The solutions. Well, number one, we can talk about virtual pronunciation tools. Some of you might have some great recommendations for virtual pronunciation tools, and I would really like to hear any suggestions that you have after this session is over, because I'm always looking for new ways to help my students too. But I do have a couple up my sleeve that I'd like to share with you all now, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up on some things that may be helpful for your students. So number one is called Speakometer. Speakometer is a great app. It's an app for iPhone and Android. And the way that this works is that you download Speakometer, you choose I'm learning American English or I'm learning British English. It doesn't just have to be one, you can choose which one that you want. And Speakometer has all of these example words for students to practice pronouncing. So this is, if you can see here on my screen, this is kind of what the app is going to look like when students open it. It will have the word in English, and it will also have the IPA pronunciation. Now, if your students don't know IPA, that's totally fine. If they do know IPA, then it's an extra benefit for them, but it's not necessary to fully understand what's happening with this app. Now, of course, vocabulary words and IPA, that's great and all, but the real benefit of Speakometer is that it has a speaking meter. So you can see here we have red, orange, yellow, green. And what students will do is for each word that the application gives them, they will pronounce it into their phone. And Speakometer will tell, hey, that pronunciation was pretty much native. You did a really great job. Or it sounds almost right, but not quite, if it's in the yellow or orange zone. And then if it's really off, then Speakometer will put it in the red place and say, hey, you need to work on this particular pronunciation. This is something that's not quite accurate in English. So what are the benefits of this? Number one, I know that a lot of teachers will ask students to speak into voice to text like Google Translate and see if their words are coming up correctly. This is great, but the benefit to Speakometer is that it shows not just incorrect or correct, it shows how correct students' pronunciations are, if it's getting close or if it's still pretty far off. And another one of these benefits is that, I don't know about you guys, but some students are very shy. Some students are very worried about their pronunciation. Some students are afraid to speak in class because they're afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of what the teacher will say. So this is something for students to be able to practice their pronunciation without the fear of the judgment by the teacher. Now, this really is geared towards older students. It is kind of a hard expectation to think, oh, my middle school students are going to make good use of this. Probably not appropriate for that age, but for your students who are at the high school level, or even if some of you are university teachers, this is great, especially for those students who really do want to get better at their pronunciation. This is homework that you can assign. You can ask students to send you screenshots in order to check their progress. It's all up to you how you use it. The next one is called Seeing Speech. This is not an application. This is a website. So in this particular example, I don't know if you all use this, but I use this in my classroom. I will show students these sagittal diagrams of different phonemes. So for example, I show them, if we're talking about TH, on the board, I will draw like this nose, this mouth, the teeth, the tongue, and I will show them where their tongue should be when they're pronouncing this phoneme. I might also draw it for S, and I might draw it for Z, so they can kind of tell where is my tongue when I'm pronouncing these words. Now, that's a little bit difficult to do, especially if you're not a good artist. So this is both a resource for you and for your students. It is a list of a ton of diagrams for different phonemes in English. So if you want to show students in a really nice graphic, like how do we make this sound? This has everything that you need. It also has example audios of all of the phonemes in English. It has even like X-ray. You can see in real life what someone's mouth and inside of their nose and their teeth look like on this website. It's a really good resource, especially for the older students. Now, if your students are younger, something that I do recommend that isn't on this presentation is a website, and it's called Pink Trombone. And I'll put it in the chat if I can. Let's see. Oh, maybe not. I'll put it in the chat later. Well, actually, let's see. Pink Trombone, this is something that if you just type it into Google, it will come up. It's less of a teaching tool and more of a kind of a game, something for younger students to play with. So it's essentially a nose and mouth, teeth, and lips that students can move with their mouse. They can click around, they can change how open the mouth is or how closed. And it allows students to see what do these changes do in terms of the sound that's being made. it's kind of a game for students to get used to how the mouth changes. Now I see that, so there's a question in the chat. Which of these apps are free and available in our country? Yes, so all of them are free. I do not want to give you anything that's not free because I don't like paying for anything. So all of these have, they're all free versions. Speakometer might have a paid version, but I've never used it. It has a lot of resources that are just free in general. Available in our country, I've tried accessing them here in Kazakhstan and they've worked perfectly fine. So it should be available for everybody. So those are some great questions. And please feel free to keep adding questions in the chat. If something comes up, I'm happy to answer them. Now, it's not just changing, or it's not just providing resources for virtual pronunciation tools. There are also other ways that you can help the teaching and education of pronunciation in your classroom that do not involve these particular apps. Excuse me. So one of the things that you can do is also content change. So of course, when we're teaching our students, especially at the younger levels, what are we focusing on? We're focusing on the phonemes, the letters themselves. We're talking about TH, we're talking about the vowels, we're talking about the sound in English. And those are very important topics to touch on. But let's say if you are in a situation where you must do online class, let's say another COVID situation, fingers crossed that never happens. But if you are in one of these situations, it may be beneficial for your students to not focus on the phonemes, but rather focus on some other aspects of pronunciation. I apologize. I've had a cold for the past 2 weeks, so I'm still coughing and sneezing a little bit. I do apologize for that. But anyway, focusing on phonemes. You might be thinking to yourself, well, what are the parts of pronunciation? What are the aspects of pronunciation that we can teach? And here's what I like to call the ladder of pronunciation. You start at the basics at the bottom, and then there are the more difficult aspects of pronunciation as you go up this ladder. So at the very bottom, you're really young students, you're focusing on the consonants. Of course, at the beginning, it's very hard, but in general, when it comes to pronunciation, it is the easiest part. Above that, you get to the vowels. And this is a little bit more difficult because you're not able to touch the different parts of your mouth with your tongue. I am so sorry. As you move up, word stress, that's something that's important and something that a lot of English learners will hate. Just the way that I hate it with Russian, you never know when the stress is going to come. That's how Kazakh is easier in this way. And as you move up, then you get some intonation. That one seems like an easy one, but in reality, a lot of students do have trouble with that, especially with getting the questions right, the question intonation of full sentences. Even me as a Russian learner, I have problems with this. The way that our questions are intoned differently. It's really hard to break that habit. So that's something to work on with students too. But then at the top of the ladder, there are more difficult subjects that you can teach your students that are also really important for helping them sound advanced, for helping them sound more like a native speaker. Logical stress, rhythmic groups, yes, exactly right. So when it comes to the top of the ladder, what else do we have? I will show you. For me, the biggest issue that a lot of my students have is actually about vowel length. Now, I think that a lot of you already know about the rules of vowel length, but it's one that I think we don't practice with our students enough. I know that I don't practice with my students enough, and I've been trying this semester to really focus. So when it comes to vowel length, why is this so important for our students to practice? Why is this so important for them to perfect or to master? I'm going to give you some examples. So if we look at the slide right here, we see some letters together. We have T and D, S and Z, F and V, K, G, P, B. And down here, TH and TH, what I mean here is the and the two different TH sounds. I put the hard TH in capital letters. And what I do is I ask my students, I show them these letters and I'm like, these sounds are really similar, aren't they? And my students will say, yeah, they are almost the same. And I ask them, can we make the T sound? Can we make the D sound? We all practice going ta, 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 da, da, da. And I have them try to explain what is the difference between T and D. And students will kind of think about it and they'll say immediately, well, it's in the same place. They're both with our tongue right behind our teeth, right? And so I'm like, that's exactly right. So why do they sound different if they're made in the same part of the mouth? And students might say something like, well, one is hard, one is soft, one is powerful, one is weak. And I'm like, yeah, you're exactly right. If we think about this in linguistics terms, and I do talk about this with my students because they are university level, we talk about voiceless and voiced consonants. The difference between these two is that with T, you're actually not using your voice. Actually, you are whispering it. There's no voice involved. And with the letter D, you are using your voice. You're using your voice box here where your throat is. And we practice whispering. And I say, if I'm whispering like this, something like that, and they say yes. And we practice pronouncing words. And I say, can you guys say the D sound? And they'll say D. And I'll say, you didn't say D, you said T. Why? Because actually, to say D, you must use your voice. If you're whispering, you're actually always going to say one of these voiceless consonants on the left. So why is that even important? Of course, to students, this is like, well, this is stupid. This is totally useless for me. What does this have to do with getting my English better? And I will explain exactly why. I'll have students take a look at some words that are very similar except for the final letter. We'll look at words like bat versus bad, leak versus league, loose versus lose, etc., etc. And I ask them, can you guys hear a difference between the words bat and bad? And students will say, yeah, I can hear the difference. And I'll say, what's different? They say, well, bat ends in T and bad ends in D. And I'm like, yes, however, there's also something different here. And I'm sure based on the topic, you guys can guess. When I'm pronouncing bat and bad, you can hear that bad is pronounced longer. Bat is very short, bad is very long. This is not a mistake. This is something that we do naturally in the English language and a lot of other languages as well. You'll see this in all of the other examples too. Half and have, cap and cab. There is this difference in the vowel length. Again, students are wondering, why is this so important? If I'm saying the letter D, well, then people will know what I mean. Even if I pronounce the word bad short, people will know because I'm saying D, right? And then I have to tell them, no, they are actually not going to understand you. They're not going to really get what you're trying to say if you're not using these long vowels when you're supposed to. And even when you look at this from a linguistics point of view, I transcribe these into IPA. Bat and bad, you'll notice that we have this symbol here. And this is probably a long time ago that you might have seen this, unless you have a textbook with IPA in it. This colon right here means that the vowel is long and it is necessary for the word to be correct. If you don't have that long vowel, it is a totally different word and people are not going to understand you. And if we're thinking about specifics, what do we need to tell students? Because I just explained all of these different things about linguistics, and the students, for some of the students, that's not so important. Oh, I don't need to know this. Well, really, you can kind of make it a little bit more basic. And you say, you need to remember these 6 letters. You need to memorize D, G, Z, V, B, and then the hard TH. Those are the 6 that we need. If students memorize these 6 letters and they see them at the end of a word, they are going to know that this word needs to be pronounced long and slow and lazy. This will take a lot of practice. When you start getting these students to really focus on vowel length, at first they do not want to make the vowels longer because it seems so exaggerated. It doesn't seem accurate. But in reality, this is the way that English speakers talk. And why is it that even if you are pronouncing the D, you know that you're pronouncing D, why is it that it's not going to sound exactly right? Well, the way that it works, of course, is when your brain is listening to a sound, it's listening to a letter, it's actually listening for 2 things. The first thing that it's listening to is the sound itself. It's listening to the phoneme, like k or g or d or t. But it's also listening to a second part, and that is the length of the vowel. So it takes those 2 things together for the brain to understand what letter you are trying to say. So if you say the letter k, or if you hear the letter k, and you hear a short vowel, a vowel that's not drawn out, that's not exaggerated, for example, in the word back, well then your brain is going to hear that and it's going to think K, and your brain would be correct. If you hear the letter G and a long vowel before it, for example, in the word bag, and you can hear the difference in the length, right? Back and bag. Well, then your brain will correctly think that that person, whoever you're listening to, is pronouncing it as G. It is the letter G, and your brain would be right. But here's where we run into a problem. If your brain hears the letter G, but it has a short vowel before it, this is something that a lot of my students say. So for example, instead of saying bag, they will say bag. They are saying G, but the vowel is not long. This is going to confuse your brain, and in the end, the person who's listening to you is going to hear K. This will lead to a lot of miscommunication between your students and other English speakers, whether they're native or not. So for example, one of my students works at Coton, the clothing store, and when I was checking out with my clothes, he asked me, "Do you want a bag?" And of course he means, "Do you want a bag?" But I don't know that. Of course, in my head, I had to say, "What? What did you say?" Because I think to myself, a back, I already have one of those, my spine. But that's not what he means. Even with this tiny, tiny change in phonemes and pronunciation, it's going to make a big difference to the people who are listening, to the people who are in that conversation. And so how do we make this interesting for students, or how do we teach it? How do we teach it so that students are going to remember? Well, something that I did with my students was the English Pronunciation Championship 2023. I came in and we were talking about what they hate about pronunciation, what they wish was easier or what they wish was better, what they wish they were more talented with English pronunciation. And I say, okay, well, we're going to have a little contest. So I ask 4 students to come up to the board, to the blackboard, and I say, okay, we're going to be doing a spelling test. Now, these words are really, really difficult. Don't be scared, but they will be challenging, okay? And then my students start getting nervous. Oh my God, what is teacher Kelsey going to put on the board today? And what I do is I ask volunteers from the other group of students, the rest of the students who are remaining, I show them some words and I ask them, you are going to have to pronounce these words. You pronounce these words and your 4 classmates at the blackboard are going to write what they hear. So, of course, the students are nervous. They're thinking, I'm going to give them all of these really long words, these really complicated IELTS, TOEFL words. And then I show the students who are not at the blackboard the words that I want them to say. And these are the words. And of course, they see this and they're like, these aren't hard at all. These are super easy. There's no reason why there's going to be a problem with spelling. And of course, I know in my mind that there will be a problem with spelling. And these students are usually quite surprised at what happens next. So for example, I asked the students to pronounce the word seed. A lot of my students will not say the word seed. And if we look back at our chart of voiced versus voiceless, going back over here, instead of saying D, they end up saying D with a short vowel, which our brain will interpret not as D, but as T. So instead of hearing the word seed, the thing that you plant in the ground, students are hearing the word seat, what you sit on. And if we look at some other examples, cab, like a taxi cab, students oftentimes are not going to hear the word cab, they're hearing the word cap, like what you put on your head. Or instead of have, students sometimes hear half, like 50%. Or in the case of crab, instead of hearing B, they're going to be hearing P. Now, this is actually something I tell my students. I tell my students, well, when I went to a party, when I first arrived in Kazakhstan, a really popular flavor of potato chips is crab flavored chips. But the person who offered me these chips did not say the word crab, or at least it's not what I heard. To me, to my brain, it sounded rather like a P. And of course, in English, this is a bad word. So they asked me, do you want some flavored chips? And I said, what? So this is really shocking. You know, this is why it's so important for your students to make that difference, because not only can it cause some miscommunication, but they may be saying things that are actually maybe even quite embarrassing. So I always tell my students this story so that they remember, okay, I have to make sure if I say the word crab, it has to be really, really long. Otherwise, people are going to hear my words and they are not going to understand what I said. And here's kind of the same thing reiterated. Seed, students who are at the blackboard, instead of writing down the word seed, often what they hear from the students who are speaking is seat. Instead of hearing cab, they often hear the word cap. Instead of wig, they hear week, which is much shorter, and have versus half. And if you're wondering to yourself, how much longer are these slow, long vowels compared to these shorter ones over here? I actually tested it out. I did a little experiment. I had a timer on my phone. I looked like a crazy person because I was sitting at home and just practicing my pronunciation. Seed, seat, cab, cap, trying to see how different it is, the difference between seed and seat as far as time. If your students, if they're really curious and they want to know what is the real difference between these two things, these long words like seed are going to be pronounced about 50% longer than the short ones. So for example, if you say the word seat and it lasts for 1 second, seed lasts 1.5 seconds, 1.5 seconds. So that kind of gives you a more concrete idea of what's going on and of how much exactly they need to lengthen their words in order for it to sound correct. And in order for English speakers to be able to hear those d, b, g, v, z, the sounds. Here's another thing that you can teach to your students that is not phonemic, not just based on the letters themselves, but instead it's focused on intonation. So what is the benefit of doing these letters here, the vowel length? Well, if you're doing something online and you have a bad microphone and your students' cameras are off or they're not looking at you, well, this is a lot easier for students to hear. Even with a bad microphone, a student can hear that one word is longer than another. They don't have to focus on the shape of their lips. They don't have to look at you and focus on the shape of your lips or hear exactly what you're doing with your voice. Instead, they can hear the length much easier, even with a bad mic, even with bad internet connection. And same for you. It's easier for you to hear if students are saying the right word because it's only based on length. It is not based on the phonemes itself, which are much harder to hear when you're online. This is the same with intonation, just like vowel length, which is something that you don't have to focus on the individual letters. You can hear this a lot easier over the computer or over their phone, because it's all based on pitch and length. And of course, people are very familiar with this, especially with questions. This is the big one that students have problems with. And the main difference in intonation between English and Russian or English and Kazakh, talking about or practicing what is the intonation when you're asking a question based on what you think the answer will be. And it is kind of interesting because it is so complicated. You don't expect it, but it is something a bit interesting for students and for me also. If you think the answer is probably yes, you like pizza, don't you? If you think it might be yes, you like pizza, don't you? Do you like pizza? You don't like pizza, do you? You don't like pizza, do you? All of those mean something completely different. So your student's head will explode. They will definitely be annoyed, like, oh my God, why is this so complicated? But it's a huge thing for students to learn in terms of their understanding. I know this as someone who has learned Russian. Questions that don't have who, what, why, where in English will end with a rising tone. American English, I should say, like, do you like pizza? Whereas in Russian, it's actually going down. My teacher of Russian always tells me, Kelsey, your questions do not sound like questions. You need to change how you're pronouncing your sentences. So it's as equally important for Russian, for example, as it is for us English speakers to get that question intonation right. And it's really hard to break that habit, but it will be a benefit for your students and something that's much, much easier to hear online, over the phone, on Zoom, etc. And here's maybe a good warm-up that you could use with your students if you're talking about intonation. I always tell my students a little bit about the non-words of English. If you have younger students, they will like this. I've taught this to all of my students of different ages. They always think it's a little funny. So I ask my students, if I say this sound, what do I mean? Mm-hmm. And my students will say, well, in Kazakhstan, that means yes. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, it's the same in the United States too. If we say, mm-hmm, then it means we agree or yes. And then I say, well, if I say, mm-mm, will they say that means no? And I'm like, yeah, well, it's exactly the same in the United States too. That one is pretty international. But there are some non-word pronunciations or intonations that actually are not international. Other countries don't have this. And what I'm about to show you is actually specific to American English. I asked my friends from the UK, do you have this sound? And they said no. So the sound that I'm talking about is, I'll tell my students, do you know what this means? Mm. And they're like, what? I say, mm. And some people might guess, I guess, or some people might guess, oh, it means you think it's delicious. And I say, no, that's which is a little bit different. Or someone says, oh, it's like you say this when you haven't heard something, you want someone to repeat it. And I say, no, that's So these are all super different types of non-word communication. The one that I'm specifically talking about, the actually, this comes from an evolution of I do not know. So of course, if you are very formal, if you are a gentleman, someone who speaks very properly, you may say the sentence, I do not know. But my students, not my students, but American students, American people are a little lazy, right? So we do not say, I do not know. We shorten that to, I don't know. But then I say, okay, actually, we're even lazier. We don't want to say, I don't know. We say, I don't know. But then we get even lazier. We say, I don't know. And then eventually it becomes, And this is why in American English, you can say, and it means I don't know. And people will understand exactly what you mean. So this is something that may be interesting for students, especially kind of a little bit younger. My students who are younger always think, oh, it's a little funny and a little goofy. So that is essentially the end of what I wanted to share with you all. And this is a chance if you want to ask some questions, I would be really happy to answer. I'm going to take a look at the chat. And let's see. English language phonetic features with the integration of the Kazakh language phonemes by methods of Yes, okay, that's very good. The great thing about Kazakh language, the Kazakh phonemic inventory, is a lot of it is in English as well. And especially it's different than with Russian speakers. Kazakh has a lot more of those sounds similar with English. Yeah, everyone's always a little bit surprised with the but if you ever talk to an American, you just shrug your shoulders, you say and they will know exactly what's right. But unfortunately, nobody teaches us this. Yeah, this is something that you would learn learning or living in the United States. But now you can teach your students this. So you can be the ones to tell your students, well, if you want to sound really American, really native, then this is the way to do it. And it will make them sound really interested. Yeah. Okay, but does anybody have any other questions? How much of authentic American speech students should have exposure to? Well, as much as possible, if you ask me. Of course, I feel like there's not a limit. Any input that they get from watching TikTok, from watching Ororo, if you guys know, I'm sure that a lot of you know this one. This is something that my friend introduced me to. Ororo. Maybe it's ororo.com, actually. This is something that they can use to listen to authentic American or English shows. Can we have your PowerPoint? Yeah, sure. I may not be able to. You know what I can do is I can put the link directly into the chat to my Canva presentation. So let's take a look here, and I will send you the link right now in the chat, and you can keep this one. Let me know if this link works. Oh yeah, so Ororo is a website that has a lot of American and British series, movies, and yeah, series and movies that are really, really helpful, both for me as a language learner and for my students as English learners. It's really a great website. Could you share some exercises or games which you would advise to use in our lesson? Yes, so definitely number one, I always do the English pronunciation championship. That gets people really excited. Something that I do that I think would be really applicable for younger students is practicing saying words and having one side of the room being slow, one side of the room being fast. And I say, guys, if you think that my word is fast word, go to the right side of the room. If you think that it's a slow word, go to the slow side of the room, the left side of the room. So it allows students to kind of see based on how other people are acting. Okay, this is how long a long word is. This is how long a short word is. Kind of gets them used to the exact length. Then should we encourage them to imitate Native Americans' intonation and accent? Absolutely. I think that it depends on really what you prefer. If you prefer British English in your classroom, then by all means, use British Council, use BBC, have them imitate that. But of course, I think that the American accent is easier, if you ask me, just because there's fewer silent letters, etc. So of course, definitely try and imitate. Presentation is asking for permission from the owner. I will go ahead and fix that right now. Let me see. I can access anyone with the link. View, copy link. Okay, so here is the updated link. So hopefully that this is going to be the one. The one that I just sent should work. So let me know if that one works. How to practice American English intonation. We can do shadowing tasks, but what else? What can you recommend? Thanks. I don't have any resources on me right now, but if you want to WhatsApp me, I'm going to put in my phone number here. I will see if I can find any resources for you about exercises for practicing intonation. So you can definitely text me, send me a message, and I will look for any resources I can find that might be helpful. Any other questions?
Actually, sorry, hello. I don't
Hi.
really have a question, but I could recommend a couple of things that could be useful for practicing pronunciation. Can I share?
Good. Yeah.
So the first one is that I would recommend. Naturally, it's a shadowing technique. You can do it by watching some TV series or documentaries on Netflix or on the YouTube, because there you can find some of the captions. There is a special place where you can turn them on.
Oh,
Second one would be Google search. So how it basically works, what you should do is that you have to Google the word, let's say the word that you don't know how to pronounce. So you just write, what could be the word? Let's just say the word chemistry, because students struggle a lot with these words because of they are taught to say ch letters as ch, so they may think it's a chemistry. They can so they take the word chemistry and put it down onto the search tab and add the word pronunciation. So when you do that, there will be a special place with this picture of a mouse. And if you just look above, there will be something that says American or British pronunciation, and you can choose it. And then there's a slowed version and the fast version.
okay, that is really
And
wonderful. Yeah.
And the next thing is the Google Documents. So there's this thing that helps you. There's, I think, something like a speaker. You can dictate the text that you want to take down. And by using Google Documents, you can check your pronunciation. Are you saying the word right, or should you do some work to improve it? And the last one is the Google Translate. So basically open the Google Translate and you type down the text that you need to read or present in front of the audience. And there is a speaker button, you press it, and it will automatically read the text back to you. So that's it.
That's fantastic. And it seems like you have a fan in the group chat. Do you mind texting it in the chat? So
Yeah,
Ms.
sure,
Faye,
no problem.
thank you so much for your resources. Actually, I'm going to borrow those for myself as well and for my students. Thank you very much for sharing. So if you could text them in the chat, I think people would really love it. And here is my phone number again. And all right. So any other suggestions? I also would love any recommendations you all have. This is, I think, a learning experience for each other. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I want to say thank you so much to everyone here for attending. It's really great to see so many people at all of the different American corners. And I really loved being able to be here and talk with you all. It's always a pleasure. Oh, and one more question that looks like during the teaching process, how much time we can spend for the right pronunciation? Oh, really? It depends on who you are as a teacher. Now, my students, when I was at university, phonetics was my favorite part of linguistics. So for me, I spent a lot of time on pronunciation, especially because I've realized as someone who has lived outside of the US and who has spoken foreign languages, the level that you sound actually has less to do with vocabulary and grammar. People will think you are higher level if you have good pronunciation, even if your vocabulary isn't great and even if your grammar isn't great. If your vocabulary and grammar are fantastic, but you don't have an accurate accent, people will think that you're lower level. So I always tell my students this is why I hammer it into them. I really want you guys to be high level. I want people to think you are high level. I'd better recommend Youglish.com. Oh, okay, good. I'm gonna write that one down. Recognition. What about Google search? All right, Miss Mere, I think that you can help with that one. So I think I actually am at another conference right now in Uralsk, and I'm going to have to go to one of my next meetings. So thank you again so much for everybody who met up today. I appreciate you listening because I love to talk, especially about linguistics and about English teaching. Thank you so much to everybody at Kostanay, Oral. Oh, we have some people from Oral. I'm in town. Nice to see you. All right, thank you so much. And I think we'll end it there. All right, bye guys. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. Bye. Thank you everyone for participating and see you tomorrow. Bye.